welcome to the Tournament Center. I'm Zach Hill here with Oscar Jones.
Yeah.
You're going to sit and tell us about red-green monsters. Now, we're talking about one of the pillars of the format. Red-green mid-range decks make up a huge percentage of the field. Can you tell us a little bit about what your deck does?
Yeah, my deck just tries to have a pretty strong early game with stuff like Colonian Tuskers, maybe ramp with Elvish Mystic, and just play some big guys that are hard to deal with.
And why exactly did you want to play this deck of everything that you could have played at this tournament? You said you were pretty confident in the list.
Well, to be quite honest, my friend Alex, or John Sittner, is playing this deck, and I just decided it'd be best to play whatever he played.
Sometimes you got to trust your friends, right?
Yeah.
Well, cool. Let's take a look at actually some of the cards in the deck. We're going to start out kind of with the early game and figure out how to get later on. We see kind of the core of the first couple of turns. We've got 4 Elvish Mystics, 4 Experiment 1, and 4 Colonian Tusker.
Yeah.
Now, the first 2 guys we see in most of the green decks that are in this format. You can kind of talk about why they're good, but I want to hear about why GG3-3 with no abilities is really good right now.
Yeah, I think it's good just because if you don't end up going Elvish Mystic into Domri Raid, then you want to have another plan. And sometimes if you've got an Elvish Mystic, or if you don't have a 1-drop, then Colonian Tusker's there to fill in. Also, it's a really good follow-up to an Experiment 1 on turn 1. So
that's definitely true. That's a lot of power.
Yeah, and it can really just put the beats on really any deck. It's bigger than most things that you can play it.
Now, you're really a 2-color deck. You don't have any real devotion synergies. Is that card hard on your mana base at all?
No, not particularly. The mana is definitely skewed towards green. There's more green sources than red. Sometimes I haven't been able to cast it on turn 2, but it's such a good turn 2 play that that's why it's there.
Cool. Okay, so let's move up the curve a little bit. We've got another 2-drop that's not really a 2-drop in Scavenging Ooze. Boon Satyr, one of the breakout cards of the tournament, and then of course Domri Raid, who is a contender for the best card in all of Standard. Tell us a little bit about these guys here and why they're so important to like the middle few turns of a deck like this.
Yeah, sure. They're well, Scavenging Ooze is something you can play on turn 2 if you don't have a Tusker or another 2-drop or even a 3-drop, and he sticks with the theme of the deck of just being really good late game as well. He's good early to, if you play him and some guys have died, you can just activate him for relatively minimal investment, and then he's a real threat that they have to deal with.
Yeah,
he's a pretty good follow-up to like a Supreme Verdict too. So he's a good guy at any stage in the game. He's a good guy to have. Now,
if you look at a card like Boon Satyr, like neither mode is kind of groundbreaking.
No, not
I guess.
at all.
And yet I've heard so many people say, I want to be playing Boon Satyr at this tournament today. Like, why is this guy so good? It's kind of, I guess, not obvious to me.
In my experience, having the ability, well, especially post-sideboard, you have some instants that are good to cast, like Destructive Revelry, being able to hold up Destructive Revelry or Boon Satyr if they don't have a target for your Destructive Revelry. Earlier today, I played against a deck he had Detention Sphered my Pithing Needle, which was naming Jace at the time, and I was able to leave up Boon Satyr and Destructive Revelry. If he played a Jace, I was going to kill his Detention Sphere, get my Pithing Needle back. If he didn't do anything like that, I can just play my Boon Satyr and still be keeping up with the...
Cool. So it gives you a lot of flexibility.
Yeah.
And then
his 5 mode is really good. Because if it's wrath-proof in a sense, in that if you just bestow it on your guy and then they wrath, you've still got your Boon Satyr.
Right, and you hit them for 4 that turn.
And you can really dodge, some sorcery speed removal like Anger of the God, Supreme Verdict, and you hit them for 4 right after that. It's a good card to have.
Seems really good. Yeah. Okay, we see Domri Raid. We know what he does. He draws you a lot of creatures.
Yeah, he's best turn to play.
Yeah, this here though is what I think I'm really excited about. And that's Pelukrinos World Eater 3 copies, Gore Clan Rampager 4 copies, 3 of Stormbreath Dragon. These are kind of your fatty boom booms.
Yeah.
Why are we playing these cards?
Well, Gore Clan Rampager, I'm pretty disappointed if I'm casting it, but he's pretty much the best pump spell ever. So that's why he's there. And he's like, you really can't draw too many Gore Clan Rampagers, as it turns out. If you've got any sort of early game, he's just great to have.
And he's kind of like a spell that you can draw off your Domri Raids.
Yeah, absolutely. And Pelukrinos is, he's very big for his spot on the curve, and he's also got an activated ability that's relevant a lot of the times. Against really any deck running creatures, you can often play a turn 3 or 4 Polukranos and follow it up with Monstrosity.
Now, are you worried at all of having 3 copies of a legendary creature in your deck?
No, I don't think I am, because he's just, if he's around, like, you're probably winning the game anyway. And if they deal with him and you have a follow-up Polukranos, so be it. I've got a follow-up from Polukranos.
Sure, and then the Stormbreath Dragon, you know, he says protection from white on him, so a lot of people are like, oh, what if they're not playing white? I mean, but the rate on this guy is really, really good, right?
Yeah. I would say he's a little bit worse than Thundermaw in that his clock is less.
Sure.
He kills your opponent in fewer turns, but protection from white isn't completely irrelevant either. You have protection from Azorius Charm and Detention Sphere out of some of the blue-white X decks, and Selesnya Charm is not protection. I guess he doesn't need pro-white to be that anyways, but you can monstrous him.
Yeah, sure. Right, exactly. Cool.
And he really just provides reach late game, like something to do late game, and he's hard to deal with.
Yeah, like sometimes you just draw a lot of mana and you need something to do with it.
Yeah,
and that's certainly something to do with it. Well, cool. So these are kind of they got a like section of their own, I guess. We got this order from the way you wrote down his deck list, but see 2 Mizium Mortars, which again are kind of good both early and late, and then this 1/1 Planeswalker split of Xenagos and Chandra. Is there like rhyme or reason to that, or do you kind of not want to draw 2 of a single one, or how did we get here?
Well, interestingly enough, it was up until last night, it was 2 Xenagos, and there was a Mutavault in the main deck instead of a basic mountain. But the fact that there's Mizium Mortars in the main and side, and I go up to 3 Mizium Mortars, John goes up to 4.
Sure.
We just want to have mountains. We want to have red mana, and Chandra is also generally going to be better than Xenagos. So the reason not to play Chandra is because it can be hard on your mana if you don't have red. But she's better than Xenagos, I would say, and there's something to be said for having a split in Planeswalkers when you're not sure too.
Totally. Cool. So speaking of your mana base, I want to look at that right now because one of the reasons that people like this deck is that its mana is a little bit better than other cards in the format. We've got 4 Stomping Ground, obviously, 4 Temple of Abandon, 10 Forest, which helps you cast those Colonian Tuskers, and 6 Mountains. So you've got 14 red sources. But I want to talk to you about Temple of Abandon real quick. There was a lot of conversation when the temples first came out about just like, you know, were they good? Was the drawback worth it? Was it that much better than a gate? I noticed you're playing 4 temples and 0 gates. Seems kind of quite a bit better than the first World Guild Gate. But I mean, exactly how good are these cards?
It's definitely much better than gates. I don't think I've had many mana problems with this deck. I don't anticipate having many mana problems. And Temple of Abandon, if it was another Stomping, I'm not sure if I could play 8 Stomping Grounds if I would, but I can't, so I'm playing Temple of Abandon. They're better than gates, and the ability to scry away sometimes excess lands, or if you keep a hand with 2 or 3 lands and you want to get to 4 or 5 for Polukranos or Stormbreath Dragon, I definitely want to have Temple of Abandon to be there. And usually you can play it without losing you can find a spot to play it without losing too much tempo. So
cool. All right, I want to take a look at your sideboard, as you alluded earlier to ramping up out of mortars in the board. It sounds like you've got a lot of ways to kill creatures. And a card I'm particularly excited about is Flames of the Firebrand. A lot of people came to the table with like aggro decks that are capitalizing on Mutavault. And I think a lot of people kind of forgot this card exists. How did we get to our kind of anti-aggro package, if that's what this is?
Well, the Flames of the Firebrand and Shock are there almost exclusively for mono red. Flames of the Firebrand is really good against mono red, as it turns out. It's almost always going to be a 2-for-1, and sometimes you mize and it's a 3-for-1.
And why 1 Shock? It's like one of those
just because numbers. It's a 1-drop. You know, sometimes if you're not doing anything on the first turn, that's the easiest way to lose to mono red. So that's why that's there. The Mizium Mortars is there to have against any sort of green mid-range deck that's like running a lot of creatures. The guy I got the list from and actually was running 2, but 2 Flames and 2 Mizium Mortars, but I ended up deciding last minute to go to,
that makes sense.
Partly because I didn't have a 4th Mizium Mortars, but I would say I think I'd stick with this.
And then Ratchet Bomb, is that also against red decks, or is that doing something different?
Depending on what the red deck is, Ratchet Bomb comes in. If they're running multiple, like many 1-drops, like 12 or 16 or 20, you bring in Ratchet Bomb for those decks. It's there primarily, however, for the green-white decks, which are running Advent of the Worm. They have voice tokens. Just it's good against 0 converted mana cost things and 1.
Oh, which is cool. You know, you don't take it up at all. You just leave it sitting around at 0 to kill 5/5s.
And you can't get your Advent into the Worm anymore.
Totally. All right, so there's more to do than just kill creatures, obviously, out of the sideboard. Just rounding it off here. Peak Eruption, Pithing Needle, Destructive Revelry, Hammer of Porphyros. I think we've seen most of these before. Pithing Needle for Planeswalkers, Revelry for Detention Spheres, and I guess Trading Posts and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Hammer, good against Control decks, but what I want to ask you about is Peak Eruption. Because most of the red decks we see are like aggressive decks whose curve stops at like 3. Why do we want that card, and what's it good against?
This is here because I was anticipating a non-zero amount of red mid-range decks that are like black-red, green-red. Well, I wouldn't board it against Mirror, but like black-red X or like blue-white-red, of course, is the best place to have Peak Eruption because they were running Chain to Rocks, presumably. And that's why that's there. I'm not honestly sure it should be 3. Maybe it should be 2. Maybe it should be 3.
Totally.
But I think it's there because there was not really anything else to put in.
And if you get a Chain to the Rocks, it's like the greatest thing in the universe.
Absolutely.
All right, cool. So that rounds out your sideboard. Thanks again, Oscar. This is red-green, just again, pillar of the format, red-green monstrous. I'm Zach Hill, and let's kick it back to the desk.